Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons; Donell, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education; and Lindsay, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. I'm Stacy Hurst, and I'm joined by Lindsay and Donell Pons. And this week we are talking literacy, not any different than any other week. Today, our topic, Donell chose it. I think it's a little, in our state anyway, it's a hot button topic. And I'm just looking forward to diving right in. So Donell, will let you introduce it to us and get us going.
Love to. I love that, the mystery topic, as you say. We're going to dive into something that for some people may be controversial, for others maybe not. It just depends. And I've got some past history with this because this topic came up when I was young. So, and I'm obviously quite a bit older now, so it's been around a long time. But it's third grade retention. And it's back again, folks. So there was a push a long time ago for third grade retention for various reasons. And it's back again under the topic of literacy and helping to improve reading outcomes. And so now there are 26 states. As Stacy mentioned, the state we're living in is one that recently has some third grade retention law of some kind on the books, or some sort of statement about third grade retention and what role it plays in literacy. So this ought to be a really interesting conversation. And we'll be referencing a few materials, but there's a lot out there. So I'm sure if you have Googled or taken a look, there might be other articles. And I'm sure you have some sort of background information. They share a lot of information. So I don't think you'll be out of the loop if you've read something else. We're going to start the conversation because I think the main question in looking at the literature and what's out there and available, and there are some good pieces, there's a meta-analysis that we'll address, and I think that did a really good deep dive on the research. But I think the main question is, we're seeing this crop up. So if research is suggesting that intervention and not necessarily repeating a grade. So that's what the research is saying, is that it's the intervention, not necessarily the repeating of a grade, that's what is improving reading outcomes. Should literacy policies focus less on a retention policy and more on guaranteeing early evidence-based intervention? And I think that's a great way to pop this conversation off. And Stacy, I'm going to go right to you. What do you think?
Yes. How's that? I do think we need to focus more on early intervention. As you mentioned, this is a topic that's come up before. And I know Utah is not unique when a lot of states created accountability at the third grade reading level. And of course, we understand the science that decision was based on. But I think it's problematic to think that third grade is the end all be all. We really need to start with our resources and supports in pre-K and perhaps before, right? And just retaining a student. I think the intent is accountability, but it doesn't seem very effective.
Yeah. Lindsay, how about you?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I've always been against retention, especially above like first grade or up, I guess. I just think that is so hard on the student, and there's no research that retention is going to do anything. You're just repeating the same stuff that you did the year prior. What's that going to do? But then reading through these articles really got me thinking, because like you said, Donell, it's the supports that come with it. And I was just thinking, gosh, the threat of retention, the good thing about the threat of retention, because really it's like a threat, I feel like. The good thing about it is it really gets adults like a little fire under them, and they take it seriously, and they make sure that they're providing the supports the students need. Now, I wish we could do that without the threat of retention. But then I'm also, I don't know, Donell, I could go a lot of different directions, because I'm also like, waiting till third grade then is like too late by then. Like, we know we need them, on track. K and 1, we need them on track. So why isn't the threat earlier? I don't know. I have a lot of different thoughts about it. I don't like the idea of making a student repeat I think a third grader having to repeat third grade. That's devastating for them. Mm-hmm. I think a kindergartner repeating kindergarten, not as big of a deal. Like, they don't even, I don't think it would affect them as much, I guess.
The self-awareness, right? And
yes.
it starts kicking in.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree with you.
I will say I had a first grader. I inherited a repeating first grader my first year of teaching first grade, and he was keenly aware that he had been retained. So I know sometimes I think, yeah, exactly. And like, to your point, Lindsay, I don't know that a kindergartner would be as tuned into that fact. But
I have had a couple students recently who repeated first grade, but like both of the ones that I'm thinking of had moved. Well, one had moved schools, so, and then the other had just moved states. So the parents kind of used that as an excuse to have them repeat. And socially, they were both fine, great. But I'm sure it just depends on the student. If it was my son who was struggling severely, and if he had to repeat third grade, that would have been devastating, because especially by third grade, you have your peers. You've been at that school for a few years, and everyone knows you, everyone is going to know that you repeat. And I just think that is so hard on a self-esteem that's probably already fragile, because they're realizing that they're struggling.
Yeah, with this core thing called reading. And Lindsay, you bring up a really good point. I kind of want to address at this point is there are some folks who are taking this, and this information, this news, is harder for them, and it's more troubling for them for a host of reasons. And you brought up one of those, and that's that group of folks who are struggling with reading because they have a reading difficulty. And so their reading journey is going to be hard anyway. And now you add this threat, this looming threat of a retention, which, as you say, can complicate and add to the stress of a lot of these folks who realize this is already going to be a tough venture for us. We're already putting everything into it, and now you're threatening a third grade retention on top of it. And those were the parents that I heard from in my practice. So I got quite a few phone calls from parents who were saying, have you seen this? What do you think? What can we do? And of course, there's always a little, at least in our legislation, there's a little piece and some wording that says, if you can prove that the student is receiving outside intervention or these various things. But again, it's so challenging for parents who are already in a difficult spot. And I don't know if people have thought that through well enough yet, about how it impacts those students who have a reading difficulty.
And it seems like in practice, though, from what I was reading and from other states, not very many are actually being retained.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah. So I thought, okay. So it is a threat. It is basically a threat.
Mm-hmm. Because a lot of those laws have loopholes too. Yeah. I think those are varied depending on the state. But I also think, Lindsay, you said it, like basically, I think the intent is to hold the adults accountable. And when I would want to ask the question, which adults? Because holding parents accountable without giving them resources, I think, there would be a population of parents who know better and could do better, right? But then there are also many parents who do not have the resources, who perhaps are not themselves proficient at reading. And I think that would be damaging to the family unit as a whole. And then the way that unit functions in society as well. And honestly, even teachers, right? I think there are so many of us who, when we know better, we do better. But without systemic supports, I think that's problematic. I was talking with a principal just the other day, and our state has started giving projections to schools based on their data, because this accountability doesn't kick in until Do you remember the year, Donell, 2030 maybe? I can't remember, or 2027. But they have started giving schools projections. And this one particular principal I was meeting with got her projection over 70% of her third graders would be retained, according to that
based on
stipulation. Data.
Well, what I need from parents, and maybe this would be a plus side of having that threat of retention, because what I need from the parents is I need them to get their child to school every day and on time. And you do have parents that are so relaxed about it. And it's especially frustrating when their child is struggling to learn how to read and write. They don't see the urgency. And they don't maybe understand. They don't think first grade is that important. So it's okay to miss all the time. It's okay to sleep in. It's okay to take them on and I'm like extreme, like lots of chronic tardies and absences. And that is like my pet peeve as a teacher. It's the most frustrating thing. And I'm like, no, it is not easy to get them caught up. So yeah, it's a big deal. Missing one day of our instruction on SH is a big deal when the child was going to struggle to retain the concept anyway. And so that's what I kind of wonder, is if it would kind of push parents to be like, yes, like make sure your child is at school. It's important. But then again, I wonder if it's not until third grade, if we would still have this problem in kindergarten and first grade, where it's just kind of,
Yeah, we did have an issue at my elementary school where I worked last with attendance, and our principal got right on it. And that's a systemic support. She was calling parents when they were absent one day. And we did have we really increased the rate of attendance. And I think that's a very specific and very important piece of information. In fact, our most recent NAEP scores kind of alluded to the fact that attendance could be an issue with those as well.
And that's interesting, because the meta-analysis that we looked at, because we had one that took a very large meta-analysis and grabbed a bunch of research that had been done and conducted and kind of tried to see what some of that information was telling us. It was called The Effects of Grade Retention in Grades K through 12, a Rapid Review of the Literature. It was an educational research review. And it basically, some of these things that you two are bringing up came out when they started really going in on the data, and they started looking at some commingling effects. And that was absenteeism, high absenteeism for a lot of these students that were eventually retained. That those were one of the factors, and said, what could we have done better to maybe address that challenge rather than this threat of retention that came down the line, but rather educating folks about how important it is to be in class every day. So that would be their parents, to know to bring them, and how important the early years are. But let's address this K-1-2 thing that keeps coming up, because I think it will keep coming up. And the Education Week article, we read one in there as well. There was a Fordham Institute piece that was done on third grade retention, and it came up there as well, talking about the fact that we're looking at third grade. And Stacy, you brought up the fact that seemed to be our focus, was look at the third grade and say, okay, how did we do? But rather what we're finding, the data is telling us K-1, 2 is where we really should be pouring more emphasis, because those are good years to get some excellent skills down and also to get some habits down around reading and writing. And yet they seem to be, as we focus, as we say, the retention on third grade, then we start pouring on summer school for those kids that are looking at retention. We start pouring on intervention for those kids. And yet already we might say the boat has left the dock in many ways. So let's talk a little bit about this. What would it take for us to look at K-1 and 2 rather than an emphasis on third? And will we ever shift our eye from third because it means so many things? What do you think?
I wonder if it's third grade. Like, do you think it's not till third grade because of this myth that kids need more time? It's just interesting that it's not until third grade that they're making that the cutoff.
I think I know the reason. And I just committed a suicide when I made my comment previously, when I said, well, we know why it's based on the research. I think it's because back when these laws began to be enacted, we had research stating that if a student doesn't know how to read by third grade, and those had developmental and instructional implications, right? Like they are more likely to not graduate. They're more likely to all of these things. And developmentally, we know that we have a very prime window of opportunity to instruct students how to read, and it kind of starts closing in third grade. And I think that's where the legislation came from, to be honest. It was like, that's when the window closes. But when we're talking about how do we make this more effective, maybe we rewind, and I know we can't do that, but in our conversations with the people who are making these laws, many of them are not educators, as we pointed out, maybe to highlight the research that says how critical those early grades are. And we're talking kindergarten through second grade, but I would add pre-K, because many students don't have access to that. And let's talk about the importance of pre-K and kindergarten and what needs to happen in those grades for students to be proficient readers. And we need to intervene early.
Okay, and so I'm going to, and I think I've mentioned this before, my own personal experience with pre-K. So having this last child that I knew was struggling, it looked different. By 2 years old, I knew there was something different with this individual in my family, this young person. We'd already been through some reading challenges with another child, but again, nothing was said to me, and it was just the right amount. And apparently this student didn't need as much. And so they're on their way, and I wasn't given much information as the parent. Yet then I see this 2-year-old and I think, oh, this is even more difficult than there was for the student we thought had maybe a reading challenge. I don't know what I'm going to do. So let's go to preschool. We'll go early program. So I enroll in a really good preschool, and it worked really well for my other students, my other children, and take him in. And right away, trust me, we're identified. Definitely teacher notices and does a home visit. So I'm thinking, this is great. I'm getting a home visit. This is exactly what I'm after. And in the home visit, I'm given a bunch of things that I know have no research, so it wasn't evidence-based, it wasn't validated. And the individual who came into my home clearly hadn't received the type of training that they would have needed in order for that home visit to be really effective for someone like me, who was going to end up supporting a student who has a reading difficulty. And so I got a bunch of things like playing with shaving cream, and I got a bunch of things like help him put an alphabet book together where he has pictures that he likes. None of the things that were really going to make a difference. I didn't get that information. So that's critical. How do we actually treat pre-K like it's useful, valid, instead of fluffy? I mean, maybe I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I think a lot of times we treat that opportunity, and it really is an important one, like it's fluffy. What do you guys think?
Well, same with kindergarten. And even in Utah, kindergarten is not mandatory. So I think a lot of parents don't realize that, but they think it's just kind of for fun. And
fluffy.
I've had plenty of kids in my first grade class that missed a ton of the kindergarten year because it was just like, whatever, it's kindergarten. And that really affected their child. And sometimes I wish they could see that, but yeah, that's, so I'm just like, gosh, let's focus on kindergarten maybe before even pre-K, but yes to all of it. Yes to all of it. But
well, and I think we need to look at licensure too, right? So pre-K teachers are not prepared in the same way that elementary school teachers are. Exactly. I mean, there are many similarities. I know. I mean, I'm at a university that has both. And we prepare teachers to teach early childhood, no matter the grade. But I think there is a good place to start. And maybe a focus on things that, I mean, like oral language is so critical. And as you were talking, Donell, and I want to ask both of you this question because you've had children who've struggled. And Donell, you already said you knew at 2 years old that your youngest was significantly different. Lindsay, did you notice that at those ages in your son, or and what did you notice? I guess would be the other question.
Yeah, this is hard because my son also had some unusual, unique medical things going on at the same time. But like for sure, when we started like preschool age, I can say about and his language was delayed, but then he caught up and his language was fine. But like when he was 3 and doing preschool, I could see a huge difference from my other kids where I was like, wow, why is it so hard for him to learn the alphabet. Like my other kids didn't struggle with this. We're like working, and it's taking him forever to learn the names and the sounds.
Donell, what did you notice with your son?
Yeah, so I wish someone had told me, yeah, that can be adorable, but can also be a sign of something. And it was mispronunciations, and not just a few. And so he had isms. We called them his isms, right? Because he was doing it so often. But that was a sign. And that was one thing right away, very different from my other three children. So he didn't have delayed speech at all. In fact, quite a talker, everything else, because people would say that to me. Well, was his speech delayed? He didn't have the delay in speech, but listen to what he was saying. That was a tip-off for me. And I didn't even know. And another one was, as Lindsay, as you say, they introduce letters, and they may just introduce one or two. I mean, it isn't rigorous, but he couldn't hang on to one or two. And, they'd do A for 2 weeks, and I'd ask him, pop up that letter, and he'd be at a loss. And this is a kid who otherwise is telling very involved stories and has an extensive vocabulary, and yet comes to looking at a letter and he can't remember the name of that letter. That as a parent. As a parent, you're saying to yourself, this is not a good sign if it's this difficult and challenging, and these are some of the basics that your student needs to know. And here's the thing, he may have been 2, but even he knew. And he wasn't really enjoying preschool for that reason. And I remember the home visit was more about, we want him to feel more comfortable. Like I said, it was more warm, and it was more, when we were in distress academically, this was a precursor, and we knew it. We all knew it. Teacher knew it. I knew it. I think little guy knew it. And we didn't get anything really of value, of help. Interestingly, what I did get was reinforcement. Oh, look at all the books you have in your home. Oh, look, he has an extensive library in his own room. Oh, look, he already has the alphabet up lining his bedroom. In fact, there were 2. We had one that I made, one that he made. I mean, it didn't matter how many. That's the sad part is it didn't matter how many of those we made. I wasn't going to do it. But that's the advice I was getting.
For over 40 years, Reading Horizons has helped educators build strong literacy foundations for students. Now with Ascend, they're supporting every learner and every tier through one unified solution, Ascend Mastery, a comprehensive pre-K through 5 core literacy program, and Ascend Focus, an adaptive K through 12 intervention. Learn more and explore how you can bring Ascend to your schools at readinghorizons.com/ascend. Implementations begin in the 2026 school year.
And Lindsay, you said something important about what is very important. And you spend your time in these grades. Stacy, you spent your time in these grades too, and you teach people who will be. And so I know you guys are always very aware of the social emotional aspect as well as the academic and learning side. It all goes together. We know this. But what was really interesting to me is by the time the school finally realized, oh dear, we really do have a reading problem, even though I had been in there since kindergarten over to his regular school. I'd spent time in his preschool, had home visit, go over to kindergarten, try to do a warm handoff to say, hey, look, this has been challenging. And I'm met with, hey, kids are all different. They'll come to it, this kind of a thing. And by the end of first grade, so I'm almost finishing out first grade, they want to move him end of first grade to another teacher in first grade. We'll move him classes because we think she can do a better job. But no one demonstrated to me that anyone knew what they were doing. And I resisted that. I resisted that movement saying, this is a guy who already feels pretty bad. So these are things that occur in schools. And when parents hear retention, someone like me is definitely going to say, right, my back will go up, my hairs will raise on my neck. Because it brings about, what are you going to do to really help? I think that's what I'm asking, right?
And it sounds like it's kind of differs by state, but that's a good thing is that it's also it's really putting that responsibility on the schools, and they're providing all this extra support. So it's like, how can we get all schools and school districts, the district leaders, to funnel that, that support, the money, the time, the leadership? Can we do that without the threat of retention? Because that would be great, but
that's why I brought up the point about adults. And I'm really going to try to temper my remarks right here. So maybe pause for a deep breath. But when we're talking about accountability, so many times that accountability lands on the teacher, the parent. I'm in higher ed. How many times does the finger get pointed there, even though, we inherit the result of the K-12 system? Topic for another time. I think the accountability needs to be on the school and district leaders. That's where the accountability needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I feel like that's where it needs to be.
Okay, so let's tackle the sticky widget that's going to come up, and what we're going to hear is maybe I've identified, and I'm getting the message as leadership, but then I write back to you, I'm going to say, but it's expensive, and I have this budget that just keeps shrinking, and I have these needs that just keep growing. What do I do? And what do you have to say?
Well, and that's where I think, like these in our state, this law came directly from our governor, bless his heart. Mm-hmm. But you know what? That's the cheapest approach. Just retain. And I know to be fair, there are other things in the law that's not just retention, right? So clearly stating those individual plans are very important. That'll help, us focus on what individual students need. They're good things too. But honestly, to have a student repeat a grade is probably the cheapest solution. When you think about even having tutoring or summer school, which have been proven to be effective, that high dosage tutoring is required. And I don't know of very many schools or districts that have that as a resource. And then also summer school. And I have attended, not as a student, but I've been there and I've been working with my students who are doing practicums in these settings. I am telling you right now, summer school is not academically rigorous, even if it's funded, right? So, and then we have paraprofessionals working with students that may or may not have the background information they need. They're working with the highest need students. I think systemically, there are a lot of things that we could do. You're right, Donell. It all comes down to resources and money. And maybe I don't know, do we incentivize those district and school leaders? I know they have, in theory, they have the highest level of accountability, right? And I know their salaries usually reflect that. Maybe that's where we start. I don't know. I don't know.
I really liked Kimono. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. Kimono Burke. She was interviewed in this article, and I really like what she said. Retention is not the goal of retention policy, she said. The goal is for students to be identified early and receive the tutoring, the attention, the individualized reading plan to prevent a student from being retained. And then she said, like we said, retention policies are effective because they motivate adult behavior. But I just want to be like, why can't that be the norm without that? Why do we have to have this threat to do that? That's what we as education leaders, that's what we should be doing all the time.
Yeah. Systemic. And I know when we had a whole episode on the Mississippi Marathon /Miracle, but they're still, as a state, they're only 31% proficient in that grade level. So I know they've made a lot of progress, so maybe we can see some changes in the short term. But I love what you just quoted from Kimono Burke, who has had a lot of influence on high quality input for these kind of situations.
And so, Lindsay, what would you say to hey, my budget's tight? Because you've probably heard this before in your own setting. My budget's tight.
Oh, yes. And there's some things getting cut this next year that I'm not happy about. But I'm like, is it? Like, can we reevaluate where we're spending our money? It goes back to that, put your money where your mouth is. If you say literacy is important, but you're diverting a lot of funds to other things, then your actions speak louder than words here. So I'm not an administrator, so I don't make those kind of decisions, and I'm not as familiar. But as teachers, we always see these things come through that you kind of roll your eyes or like, really? Or like, isn't there a way? I mean, we write plenty of grants, it seems like, for different technology things. Why can't we get a grant to help support our literacy initiatives? I don't know.
Yeah.
I appreciated what Dr. Rivera, when we interviewed Grant Rivera, absolutely, in their school district, which, by the way, their scores are continuing to climb. So what they're doing seems to be working, but he also is very clear all the time. It's a long game, right? But it's a community effort. He does focus in their district. They do focus on preschool. They do focus on parental supports. And he mentioned that they're not even going to talk about purchasing a curriculum, which is where a lot of funds go, until their teachers are adequately supported with knowledge.
I do remember that. Yeah. Because like you say, there are a lot of places you could be putting your money. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to focus. That's a great focus in training those teachers, making sure they're trained. And then it also made me think, you guys, if the system actually starts to work, imagine how much lighter the load gets. So we're always sitting in crisis mode. But if we actually were able to turn things around and say our preschool teachers are taught to have some of the skills that they really need to intervene on literacy, so that person who makes the home visit to my house gives me some really usable things and then alerts me to the fact that what I need to keep an eye on, so I'm prepared when I go over to that kindergarten to have yet another teacher who's well trained. So imagine that lifting. I don't know that we've seen that kind of a lift where you actually have all of it working. What would it be like?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the idea behind MTSS and even RTI to precede it, was that if we could get our tier 1 and those kind of resources in operating at optimal levels, then our resources can be funneled to the students who need them the most.
Yeah. And that load becomes lighter. The Fordham Institute, that one article that I referenced that was also included in some of what we read, he addressed the fact that what is retention? What are retention laws really saying about MTSS? And he actually took a look at MTSS across the country and said there really isn't a good functioning MTS system-wide within a whole district that he's ever seen. And I think that's pretty sad. It is saying a lot.
It made me think about that. Yeah, I do remember reading that too. And
Okay, so we're not saying, just to recap for folks, what we are saying is that we know a lot of things, and we know a lot of things that work. And we're talking about still getting those things in place across the system so they can be as effective as we know they can be. So we know these things. Lindsay pointed out that although we have these retention laws, a lot of students are not being retained because it does kick things into gear. We start to see the summer school, effective summer reading. We start to see intense intervention for students who need it. And so that's another thing that's a part of this that comes into this. And so there are some good things that we can say about what happens when we put a fire or light a fire under the adults. But how do you think states can do a better job overall? What are some things that maybe we see states could do that would be as effective and helpful as, say, a retention program that might even do things better by going further down the stream? And so what I'm saying is, what about more mandatory looking at or screening for reading difficulties and differences and taking a look at your data? Because I hear all the time about folks that say, hey, we don't take really good data where we're at. And I'm thinking, well, then how can you make a change?
Yeah.
I don't know how things are going to turn around.
I don't want to be a reductionist, but other than resources, like Lindsay mentioned, reallocate resources. And I know that's not easy. And I know it's not just as simple as, oh, this is, let's all of a sudden send money here. But and a lot of that does involve grant writing and grant opportunities. But and maybe this is reflective of the current position I'm in the literacy landscape, I'm going to go back to increase knowledge for everyone, not just teachers. I mean, poor teacher, we've heard that forever, right? And we are always refining and adding to our knowledge. but really provide supports so that happens. I also think, I visited with a superintendent the other day who admitted, and I was so grateful that he did, that he doesn't really know much about literacy at all. And so learning, having our leaders learn more about it, I think is key. And that's not, sorry, I don't want to change the topic slightly, but when we're talking about knowledge, it includes knowledge of how English learners respond to this kind of legislation. If their language in English isn't where it needs to be or isn't supported, or students who are experiencing homelessness or poverty, and the data bears out, they are overwhelmingly identified as students who are retained. So let's look at those things too, right? And increase our knowledge on how to provide supports there as well.
Yeah, I don't think that changes the subject at all. I think it's right in the subject is the equity around these sorts of things, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been, for me anyway, an interesting conversation. I think there are probably others out there that will find this interesting too. And I think this is a stay tuned, because I think we're going to be getting more information. As Stacy pointed out already, the law that we have, or the retention things that we have on the books here in our own state, we've yet to see. So there will be information coming. And hopefully folks are doing a lot of research and writing articles around this subject. So hopefully there's more conversation, discussion, and we see how maybe this evolves. So I do think this is there's more to come on this topic for sure.
And stay the course on what we've already started on, right? Because the more we know, the easier those decisions are going to be made. Even I think about that preschool teacher, Donell, who visited your house. If she knew what needed to happen in the brain for your child to be, a proficient reader, her advice to you and resources would have been different than pull out the shaving cream and have him do letters and shaving cream, right? So I think hopefully that's an encouraging note to just keep learning and stay the course as educators, of those of us who are closer to the front lines and on the front lines, continue to build that knowledge. I think that's important. Lindsay, you're a good example of that. You already have data that bears out that you are systemically in your classroom doing things that make a difference for students, and you continue to improve that. I have never, in all my years of knowing you, hearing you say anything like, yeah, I've got it figured out. I've got it all figured out. We're good.
Always more to learn. There's always, you can always do better, right?
Yep. No matter the role you're in. So thank you for this conversation, Donell. It is a lot to think about. And and I know that we think of students, and many of you are probably picturing students who this would affect as well. So we'll do our best for them, by them. Yes. And thank you for listening. Feel free to reach out and share with us about your thoughts and feelings about third grade retention. And maybe you're in one of the states that has had this law or that will. And we're always happy to keep the conversation going. And we hope that you'll join us on the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.